Hey, everybody. It is Friday, September 6th. You're listening to the Mo.news podcast. I'm mo.news.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. But sometimes I get the date wrong.
I was going to say, we bring you the facts, but maybe not the correct date. And I think we both have to, unfortunately, take responsibility for that one, Mosh. So apologize to everybody who listened to this podcast yesterday and thought it was Wednesday when it was actually Thursday.
You're like, I got a bunch of notes. You're like, Mosh, how could you do that to me? I wake up with you guys and you told me it was Wednesday and I knew it was Thursday. How can I trust what you guys tell me if the third word out of your mouth was that it was Wednesday on a Thursday? So Jill wrote Wednesday down. I read Wednesday. We happened to record on Wednesday night for Thursday, but no excuses. So somehow Jill didn't catch it. I didn't catch it. Jill didn't catch it when I said it. Our editor didn't. Basically, nobody caught it.
No, well, because I don't think anyone knew what day it was.
Nobody knows it's a short week. So, but we're not going to make excuses here. We're going to take responsibility, and we appreciate all of you that, despite the fact that on yesterday's pod I led with the wrong day, you still listened and you still trust us and you're still here today, despite yesterday's error.
Thank you. And I will say, in general, dates, Mosh, as you have learned, are not my forte. Like, for some reason,
leave it blank.
I have a...
Leave it. Don't even try anymore, Jill, with on this day and the date at the top. Just leave it XXXXX and just be like, Mosh, fill in the blank moving forward.
This is you. I'm a pretty good writer. I have strengths.
You have good news judgment. You know what's important, what's not important. Like the smell. You're like the date. Just don't. Like you're the kid in class. Is like, will dates be included? Like, will we be great on dates? And you were hoping for the teacher to say no, and I was the one being like, I would like her to say yes because I tend to know dates. Like I can't tell you what I had for dinner 2 nights ago, but I know like random dates from history. Speaking of dates today, Jill, I did a quick Google, September 6th, like what holiday is on September 6th? Any honorary holiday? And you will be glad to know that today is National Lazy Moms Day. Not to say that moms are lazy, but to allow mom to let other people do work for them today. There are approximately 90 million mothers in America, several billion around the world. And so today, I don't know who coined it. I don't know how this came to be. I'm looking for the origin of it. But all you need to know is it's National Lazy Moms Day. So don't take out the garbage today. Don't feed the pet. Make someone else do it.
It's not Lazy Moms Day. It's Mom's Self-Care Day.
That'd be a much better name. Yes. That'd be a much better name for the holiday.
All right, whatever day it is, let's get to some headlines. Some new details about the tragedy in Georgia where the gunman, a 14-year-old gunman, killed 2 students and 2 teachers. What we know about the warning signs leading up to the shooting. Trump versus Harris when it comes to the economy. Mosh, I feel like you've been waiting your whole life for this discussion.
I get it all the time. Are Democrats or Republicans better on the economy? And I'm like, well, it depends. It's like the chicken or the egg. Which came first? We'll try to get to the bottom of it today. So stay tuned.
Sticking with politics, Hunter Biden changing his plea in his federal tax case to avoid what would have likely been an embarrassing trial.
But it doesn't mean he could face some prison time. Notably, his dad is president. What President Biden is saying about a commutation or potential pardon.
And in another political case, the first hearing in the Trump election subversion case since that Supreme Court immunity ruling. Overseas, a gunman at the Israeli consulate in Germany has been killed by German police on the anniversary of the Munich Olympics massacre. The FDA has a massive backlog of factory inspections as staffers leave for private sector jobs. We'll take a look at some of the numbers. And Mosh, Connecticut, pizza capital of the country. I'll tell you about the new controversy.
Yeah, what New Jersey and New York have to say about it.
Plus, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend, what we are watching, reading, and eating.
Jill, frozen fruit.
Ooh.
Oh, Jill's like, been there, done that, Mosh. I was like, well, it's what I'm into right now.
Mosh, you live on the edge over there.
I can't wait to hear what your edgy cuisine is this weekend, Jill.
Nothing, but I don't. Yeah. But I'm not teasing it. Okay, so stay tuned for some fun at the end of this podcast because it has been a rough news week. And we begin again today with the latest developments out of Georgia in the investigation into that deadly school shooting. It took place Wednesday at Appalachia High School in Winder, Georgia. It's about an hour outside of Atlanta. It is the deadliest U.S. school shooting of the year and the first since June. The shooter killing 2 students and 2 teachers and wounding and hospitalizing 9 others. So that 14-year-old suspect is expected to make his first court appearance virtually this morning at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. He faces 4 counts of felony murder, according to the charging documents that were obtained by CNN. And there was a major development last night as the father of the shooter, Colin Gray, was arrested and charged with multiple crimes. So in addition to 2 counts of second-degree murder, that father was also charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter and 8 counts of cruelty to children. At a news conference Thursday night, the director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation said that the charges were, quote, directly connected with the actions of his son and knowingly allowing him to possess a weapon. He apparently bought the rifle as a gift for his son last Christmas, who was then in 8th grade. 2 family members told the New York Times that the 14-year-old shooter had a troubled home life. The grandfather, Charles Palamas, telling the newspaper that, quote, my grandson did what he did because of the environment that he lived in. An aunt, Annie Brown, texted, the adults in his life let him down.
Jill, this comes, and we'll get to it in a bit here, as we've seen in multiple recent mass shootings, parents start to be arrested and charged. There's a couple in Michigan right now that are serving prison time after their son committed a school shooting. And this is something we discussed on the podcast yesterday.
And we're also learning more about what actually happened in the school on Wednesday morning. Students say the suspect was in algebra class. He left the room at the beginning of class and then tried to get back into the classroom, but was stopped by another student after she saw through the window next to the door that he had a gun. So the doors automatically lock when they close. That means someone from inside the classroom needs to let him in. One of the students said that the gunman then turned the gun on people in the hallway and then moved to other classrooms. 2 school resource officers confronted the shooter within minutes after the gunshots were reported, and the teen immediately surrendered. And we are learning a bit more about him. Some have described him as pretty quiet, that he regularly skipped class. Authorities are investigating how he brought that weapon into the school. They have been searching his home. Investigators telling CNN they found documents that they believe he wrote referencing past school shootings. And that includes references to the 2018 massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida.
Yeah, back to the father here, as you mentioned. Colin Gray apparently told investigators himself that he purchased the gun used in the killings as a holiday present last Christmas for his son, again, in 8th grade at the time. One source telling CNN that the AR-15 style rifle was purchased at a local gun store. And the timeline here is significant because this would now put it just a few months after the son here, who, by the way, we're not naming because they're looking to get famous with their names, was first put on law enforcement radar. As we mentioned yesterday, he and his father were questioned by law enforcement last May, just over a year ago, regarding online threats to commit a school shooting. So it's May 2023. Jackson County Sheriff's Office received a tip from the FBI. The FBI saying, hey, on the chat platform Discord, there's a threat about shooting up a middle school. The tip referenced an account that had been created the previous month with an email address that had been associated with the kid at the time. So it included photo attachments as well with a profile name that was in Russian, but translated to Adam Lanza, the infamous Sandy Hook shooter. Apparently, the post on Discord also had photos of guns. So the FBI calls Jackson County. They're like, you need to go interview this kid. We think he's associated with this threat. So they interview the then 13-year-old and his father at their home in Jefferson, Georgia. One of the investigators wrote at the time of the interview that the kid said that he would never say such a thing. He would never write such a thing, not even in a joking way. And at the time, the father said, listen, I have guns in the house, but my son is only allowed to use them when supervised. He does not have unfettered access to them. We now know that was last spring. just months before the dad decided to buy an AR-15 style rifle for his son, who had just been questioned by law enforcement about a school shooting threat. So imagine we're going to learn a lot more details on this. Investigators at the time, though, all they had to go on was what the father promised, right? What the father was saying and what the kid was saying. So they basically cleared him because they could not prove with beyond a reasonable doubt that he made the threat on Discord. Now, the Jackson County Sheriff has reviewed the documents. Earlier in the day, before charging the father, they told the Associated Press, "We did not drop the ball on this. We did all we could do with what we had at the time." Now, prior cases have emerged. We've told this story before, that someone was on the FBI's radar or local authorities' radar and was not arrested at the time and then would go on to commit violence. Among them, Nicholas Cruz, the shooter of the Parkland school who killed 17 people. The Bureau had received a warning that he had been talking about committing a mass shooting in advance. But there are major challenges here for law enforcement in trying to determine when concerning behavior crosses into a crime, when talking about something actually is a crime. They, of course, have tens of thousands of tips every year, many fake. There's a lot of fake bomb threats, kids trying to get out of a test or so. And then the real ones, a big thing here is the parents, right? And in this case, the authorities went to the dad. The dad made the promises that he did. But ultimately here, it appears the father decided to buy him a gun just months later. So, as I mentioned earlier, they've been scrutinizing and now charging parents, in particular in Oxford, Michigan, where that school shooting took place a couple years ago. Mom and dad now in prison. That's James and Jennifer Crumley. We covered that trial. You also have the case of the Highland Park, Illinois shooter, July 4th, a couple of years ago. That's another case where the father pled guilty, I think got 60 days in prison, probation time, etc. Again, getting some actual legal responsibility because of what his son ended up doing. So here they're trying to hold the dad accountable. And it appears, Jill, based on what you were saying, the grandfather, the aunt, they all knew the situation was not good at home.
And Mosh, sadly, it feels like these all follow the same playbook. There were red flags, there were warnings. No one is surprised, and yet nothing was done.
Yeah, one of the things that comes up here is there are laws that can be passed about safe storage, right? Now, ultimately, people have to abide by those laws, but there's only a certain number of states that mandate safe storage, that guns are kept in safes. But I do think one of the reasons you now see authorities going after parents is the idea that if you have a sense that your kids might do something like this, even a remote chance, you now know that you could go to prison over that. And so ultimately, this is just the latest case that might ultimately change things. Beyond, of course, states or even the federal government taking up more safe storage laws.
Okay, now to the presidential election. Former President Trump spoke Thursday at the Economic Club of New York, laying out some of his economic proposals. First, cut government regulation. He wants to get rid of 10 regulations for every new regulation. He also wants to create a government efficiency commission run by billionaire Elon Musk. He wants to impose sweeping tariffs on imports. So he says this would help with inflation. That's something that economists have said is inaccurate. They say tariffs are basically taxes on foreign imports and tantamount to a tax increase on American consumers. Trump also said he wants to make his tax cuts permanent and promised that if he's elected, gas prices would be, quote, dirt cheap. And he also called Kamala Harris a Marxist.
Yes, Comrade Kamala. His newest nickname for her, I think this is the one he's going to go with based on his social media account. But in all seriousness,
this one is sticking, Mosh?
This one, he's trying it. He thinks it's going to work for him. But in all seriousness here, when it comes to economic policies, he effectively signaled yesterday that his second term would look much like his first term when it comes to tax policy and tariffs, but he's really trying to ratchet up tariffs there. I'll get to that in a second. He has said that he would push to extend his tax cuts from 2017. Remember, they're set to expire next year, and that'll be a big issue that comes up for whomever is elected president, is there's an expiration date on these tax cuts. But at the same time, if they're extended, that means trillions of dollars the government is not getting at a time where we're in a deficit. In fact, he also said that he would push to lower the corporate tax cuts even further than his previous legislation did, from 21% down to 15%. Of course, that requires Congress. And it's unclear who's going to win the majorities in the Senate and the House. It does come down to Congress, especially when it comes to tax policy, among other things. When it comes to tariffs, he has said that he will target companies that outsource jobs or do not manufacture products inside the U.S. He's talked about a 100% tariff on products from China, effectively doubling the price of things. It's particularly controversial. Even among most conservative economists who are not into tariffs, not into that sort of policy that closes off the U.S. from the rest of the world, effectively what they say is that it will lower GDP, that tariffs are a tax increase on Americans because, of course, everything that comes in from abroad can't immediately be manufactured here, which means you and I are all paying more for things. So they're very wary when they talk about these massive tariffs that he's talking about. Goldman Sachs, the bank, put out a note this week that said that the Trump-led government would lead to lower GDP. The Trump campaign says, oh, that's a very liberal outlook. I think most people who know people who work at Goldman Sachs and Goldman Sachs know that they're not a particularly liberal financial institution. But again, that is the consternation around the idea of tariffs there. Though in certain cases, the tariffs that he's imposed, the limited tariffs he's imposed on China during his presidency, Biden has kept most of them as the U.S. looks to keep its advantage in certain areas and help increase domestic output here, incentivize companies to do work from here. So the question is, how far do you go in terms of scope? You mentioned his Government Efficiency Commission, looping in billionaire, richest man in the world, Elon Musk, who runs multiple companies. Remember what he did at Twitter, where he chopped staff left and right. That's something conservatives often talk about. They talk about ending the federal Department of Education, chopping off a lot of the EPA, DHS, FBI. That's been a dream of conservatives for a long time. And he's talking about bringing in Elon Musk, among others, to help him do that.
Doesn't Elon Musk have enough on his plate?
No, Elon's got like 3 minutes left in the day, Jill, to do some other stuff.
Well, he better be efficient.
Yeah, though I should remind folks, when it comes to these commissions, they all sound grand, but they're commissions nonetheless. Ultimately, to do any of the things the commission recommends, who do you need? Congress and a president, all agreeing on stuff. As far as economy is concerned, you got Kamala Harris, who is prepping for Tuesday's debate. But on Wednesday, she laid out more of her economic agenda. She proposed increasing tax deductions for small businesses and $25,000 in down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. We've talked about that before. She's also called on raising the corporate tax rate to 28% for corporations. Biden, remember, has been talking about proposing a 40% tax on corporations, increasing it to 40%. So as we look for differences between Kamala Harris and President Biden, that is one of them. She isn't talking about as much of an increase on corporate America. Interestingly, she's also vowed to keep Trump's tax cuts from 2017 in place, but only for certain income levels. If you make less than $400,000 a year, you will get to keep those tax cuts. But if you make more than $400,000 a year, rates will raise as far as Kamala Harris is concerned. Who will be the judge of that? Congress. She has not proposed new tariffs for now in terms of a difference there with Trump. Both candidates are talking about increasing the child tax credit, eliminating taxes on tips. That's something Trump first proposed, that Kamala Harris now says that she would like to do as well. And so we shall see a lot of promises being laid out by the candidates. We'll see if any of these things will be able to be implemented when either becomes president.
And Mosh, the big picture in terms of how Democrats and Republicans have handled the economy, as we broke down in today's newsletter, while we do focus a lot on who is president and they like to take credit for a good economy and blame their predecessors for a bad economy, it isn't clear how much direct impact they can individually have. Because as you mentioned, Mosh, there is a lot of factors here, like who is in Congress and what they're willing to pass.
And Jill, you got global factors, unpredictable events like 9/11 and COVID that factor in here. So when we're often asked, like, who's better for the economy, Democrats or Republicans? My answer immediately is, it depends.
Very helpful. Thanks. Thanks for clearing it up. Yeah. Nevertheless, we did compile some data for the newsletter because, again, you do often ask which party is better for the economy. So here are a few buckets. One category is job creation. Since World War II, Democrats have seen job creation average 1.7% per year when in office versus 1% under Republicans. Next up, the GDP, or economic growth, has averaged a rate of 4.23% per year during Democratic administrations versus 2.36% under Republicans. So So again, stronger growth under Democrats. On inflation, it appears Republican presidents tend to have lower inflation. Since 1969, in the 32 years that Republican presidents have held office, the average inflation was 4.75%. And under the 23 years of Democratic administrations, inflation averaged 8%.
Though Democrats would tell you that's because the majority of recessions have happened under Republican presidents. And when you have recessions, you tend to have lower inflation because the economy isn't growing. So however one defines it, whenever one starts the date, there's a few categories here. By the way, let's throw in the stock market. Who's better for the stock market? Well, it depends. How would you like to rank the stock market? Depending on how you look at it, Democrats have been better or Republicans have been better. And most people who work the markets will tell you, we don't care, because ultimately they both do things that upset the market. They both do things that benefit the market, right? Democrats typically engage in more spending. Market likes that. Republicans typically engage in tax cuts. Market likes that. So, you could look at 19 presidential terms here, most of the 20th and 21st century, and it does appear that on a few of those factors, as you mentioned, Jill, GDP, job growth, you have Democrats. On inflation, you have Republicans, but then the Republicans oversee the majority of recessions. In fact, the last 5 recessions have all been under Republican presidents. They might say it's bad luck. Well, Bush says the housing market collapsed during my term. 9/11 happened during my term. The dot-com boom happened during my term. Trump would say COVID happened during my term. But otherwise, things were going along swimmingly. And then you have the fact that Republicans say, well, we're just here to clean up Democratic messes, and that's why things go south because their policies sucked. Democrats say, no. We're here to clean up Republican messes because they had recessions. And so, ultimately we fix things. Republicans say, you didn't fix things. You took advantage of all the policies I put in place. The point here for your dinner table conversation with your various relatives is, how would you like to rank the economy? Would you like to talk GDP? Would you like to talk about job growth? Would you like to talk about private sector job growth, the stock market, inflation? Because depending on who you talk about, and depending on when you start the date, things change here. By the way, if you take it back to the Great Depression and you add in Herbert Hoover, Republican, FDR, Democrat, the benefits here for Democrats grow even larger because, of course, you're factoring the Great Depression. So again, do you want to start with Jimmy Carter? Do you want to start with FDR? Do you want to start with Nixon? We could go on and on and on. And the point being here is that you have presidents there, you have Congress, you have global factors, you have unpredictable things, black swan events, they're called, right? That nobody anticipated. And so ultimately here, you have all that. And by the way, when you ask the why, you're like, well, why is it that GDP and other stuff tends to be better under Democrats? A lot of economists put their hands up. We're not sure. So that's how I'd like to end this segment, Jill.
So with more questions than answers.
Yeah, that's what I got for you today on this Friday when people say, hey, Joe, hey, Sally, do we have any Sallys to listen to us? Is the economy better under Democrat or Republican? You're like, when would you like to start the clock? It's sort of like my answer when it comes to the Middle East. Like, well, whose land is it? I don't know. When would you like to start the clock, folks?
1948.
Or would you like to start in 4000 BC with the Phoenicians? They're not around anymore, but is it technically Phoenician land? Anyway, I move on.
Time for the speed read from Politico, starting with one of Donald Trump's cases. It is no great surprise, but Thursday's hearing in front of Judge Tanya Chutkan confirmed that Donald Trump's most significant federal criminal case regarding January 6th and the federal election interference in 2020 will not go to trial before this November's election. She said in court Thursday that it will take months for the trial to begin on Trump's charges of subverting the 2020 election. She emphasized that her timeline is independent of political concerns. She said she first needs to take up questions stemming from the Supreme Court's ruling this summer establishing sweeping presidential criminal immunity, and any decisions will then likely be appealed. Of course, if Trump wins, his prosecution will die outright because he'll be in charge of the Justice Department. Regardless, another delay amounts to a significant political win for the former president, who has managed to make it to another election day without facing trial for what happened around the last one.
Yeah, of course he has that state case in Georgia, which is a mess because of Fani Willis and issues around her prosecution and her choice of her boyfriend to help prosecute that case. Then you got the federal case with the Supreme Court ruling. You've had the special counsel here have to, as we told you, put out a revised indictment, a slimmed down indictment, but still the same 4 charges. But these things are complicated. And his legal team strategy was to gum up the trials with questions and appeals. And that has worked out here. Of course, he will have a sentencing this month in his New York case. This is the Stormy Daniels hush money case. We'll see what happens with that state case. But as far as the classified records, the January 6th on the federal front, the election interference in Georgia, those other three cases, much more serious than the New York case, he ain't going to face it before Election Day. The Trump team, by the way, saying there's even more immunity issues to deal with here. She laughed at saying that the Supreme Court's decision was crystal clear here, and she rejected the Trump request to dismiss the case outright, saying there will be a case here. Well, again, it depends, as you mentioned. If he wins here, it ain't happening. If Harris wins here, he would likely face it next year.
Staying with political and legal news from NBC News, Hunter Biden has now pleaded guilty in the federal tax case against him. It is a reversal that was made shortly before jury selection was expected to begin in what would have been Biden's second trial this year. He was planning to plead not guilty until yesterday. Hunter's lawyer told the judge that his client wants to enter what's known as an Alford plea, where a defendant formally admits guilt and acknowledges the strength of the case against them, while also maintaining their innocence. Shortly after the announcement, the court went into recess to allow prosecutors and Biden's lawyers time to confer. Yeah, that is weird, right?
Alford plea or not, he now faces a maximum prison sentence of up to 17 years or a fine of $1.3 million for this tax evasion case. He was indicted last December on 3 felony, 6 misdemeanor counts, alleging he failed to pay his taxes during a period when he was in the throes of drug addiction. The guilty plea now spares him of a public trial that would have been super embarrassing, salacious details about his drug use, spending, a bit of what we got in that gun case earlier this year, the separate federal crimes he had. The indictment says he engaged in a 4-year scheme to not pay at least $1.4 million in self-assessed federal taxes between 2016 and 2019. The money instead was spent on drugs, escorts, girlfriends, luxury hotels, rental properties, exotic cars, clothing, other items, basically everything but taxes. He has now repaid the federal government, but he faces this case. So as I mentioned, he now faces up to 17 years with his guilty plea. Typically, when you plead guilty, you should get a less of a sentence there. But then he also has a potential 25-year sentence, which, again, we don't expect to be 25 years because he's a first-time offender, on that gun case on lying on a firearms application, saying he wasn't on drugs while buying a gun when he was, in fact, on drugs. So he's got both of those issues, sentencing expected in both of them this fall. And, of course, his dad is president. He's the first offspring of a president to face a trial, at least in that first case. In this case, he's pleading out. But of course, when you're the president, you can commute sentences and pardon sentences. Well, the White House was asked about this again yesterday, and they said, nope, President Biden does not plan to commute the sentence or pardon his son. We shall see if that is true. That would be a remarkable thing, given how much Biden loves his son, that he would allow his son to go to prison. Would a President Kamala Harris potentially commute or pardon Hunter Biden? Well, unclear, because she would need to run for re-election. So Biden sort of is in a perfect situation here to do it, since he's not running for re-election. Would it come at, the morning of January 20th of the inauguration? Again, they say it's not going to happen, Jill, but we'll see what he's sentenced to. I can't imagine Joe Biden allows Hunter to go to prison, huh?
I would think not. They've stood by him throughout this entire process.
Hunter's been hanging out in the Oval Office, when Biden was making his decision on whether to run for re-election, Hunter was with him side by side in the Oval Office, hanging out. He's going to let his son go to prison? And
Mosh, the same way that there are people who say that Trump wouldn't be facing some of the trials or cases that he's facing, particularly the civil cases and the cases involving business fraud in New York City, if he wasn't Donald Trump and running for re-election. There's also people who argue that Hunter Biden would not be facing these charges if he was not the president's son.
Right. The gun case in particular, they prosecute 12 of them a year in America, because they typically only prosecute if you buy the weapon, you lie on the application, you then use it in a crime. He owned it for 10 days. They threw away the gun. He never used it. So, and he's also a first-time offender. So yeah, that's the thing. Is ultimately, would he even face this case if his name wasn't Biden? And by the way, if Biden had decided not to run for re-election, would these cases have gone forward? That's unclear at this point because, of course, Republicans are trying to stick Joe with Hunter stuff. At the same time, though, Joe Biden's been trying to say, listen, I'm different from Trump. I keep my DOJ independent. And, as much as it pains me, I'm going to let them independently pursue my son to show that as a president, I don't influence the Justice Department.
From Fox News, a gunman opened fire at the Israeli consulate in Germany on Thursday on the anniversary of the Munich Olympics massacre. German police exchanged gunfire with an armed Islamist outside of the consulate, ultimately killing the gunman. Police engaged the shooter, suspecting that he was planning to attack the Israeli consulate. Authorities say he had a long rifle with a bayonet attached, and he returned fire when police engaged him. They've yet to identify the gunman, but say content on his phone suggests that he was an Islamist.
Yeah, he's an 18-year-old Austrian national with Bosnian roots. No one was injured, aside from the gunman who was killed by police there. This did occur on a significant date, the anniversary of the massacre of Israeli athletes by Palestinian terrorists in 1972 at the Olympic Games in Munich. Prosecutors say that they confirmed that his plan was a terror attack on the Israeli consulate there. They eventually deployed 500 police officers around the consulate following the shootout. No one was injured on the Israeli side of this. The consulate happened to be closed because of the holiday. A reminder, back in 72, the Summer Games were being held in Munich, and that's when terrorists killed 11 Israeli athletes and held others hostage for days inside the Olympic Village.
From the Associated Press, federal regulators responsible for the safety of the U.S. drug supply are still struggling to get back to where they were in 2019 before the COVID-19 pandemic upended factory inspections in the U.S. and across the world. An AP analysis of FDA data shows that the agency staffers haven't returned to roughly 2,000 pharmaceutical manufacturing firms to conduct surveillance inspections since before the pandemic. Well, why does this all matter? It raises the risks of contamination and other issues in drugs used by millions of Americans. The firms that are overdue for safety and quality inspections represent about 42% of the 4,700 plants that are currently registered to produce drugs for the U.S. and previously had underwent FDA review before May of 2019. And these are plants that make hundreds of critical medicines like antibiotics, blood thinners, and cancer therapies.
Yeah, under the FDA's own guidelines, factories that have not been inspected in 5 or more years are considered a significant risk and are supposed to be prioritized for what's called mandatory inspections. Most of the overdue plants are here in the U.S., but more than 300 of them are in India and China. They make up a major source of low-cost U.S. prescriptions. That said, the FDA is responding to the AP investigation here, saying the U.S. drug supply is the safest on the planet and no other regulator conducts more inspections than the FDA, noting the agency has increased drug inspections each year over the course of the past 3 years, prioritizing foreign factories. That said, last year's inspection numbers were still down 40% from back in 2019 when the FDA was averaging more annual inspections.
And finally, from the Norwich Bulletin.
Jill, we don't use the Norwich Bulletin as a source here enough on the speed read.
No, if you ask me, they should be a bigger part of this podcast.
The Norwich Bulletin, local news in Connecticut.
Connecticut making big claims with its new highway signs, welcoming visitors to the state. Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont shared the new signs on social media this week, which include mentions of the state's prevalence in basketball, pizza, submarines, and New England food. One of the signs says, "Welcome to Connecticut, home of the pizza capital of the United States." If you're thinking Connecticut pizza, the local newspaper says Connecticut's pizza capital, New Haven, is known for its white clam pies.
They have some good pizzas there, Jill, but to claim they're the pizza capital of America, well, some states are taking issue with that. Among them, New Jersey, which, by the way, has declared itself not pizza capital of America, the pizza capital of the world. New Jersey does not care. New Jersey says we have the best pizza in the world. Connecticut, a little more humble, saying, no, we just have the best pizza in America. New Jersey's X account asked the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, if it is legal to lie on road signs. New Jersey ain't taking this softly. The governor of New Jersey saying yesterday, you're not even the pizza capital of the tri-state area, Connecticut. The tri-state area, of course, referring to New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. But Connecticut going with the pizza thing. So they say they're the pizza capital of America. On the other signs, they say they're the basketball capital of the world. They claim that because UConn men's and women's teams have won more college championships than any other state. So have won more college championships than any other school. So UConn, basketball capital of the world. They also claim to be the submarine capital of the world. Why? Because the submarine was invented in Connecticut. More humble, though, they have another sign that you might see if you drive through Connecticut anytime soon, the foodie capital of New England. So I like that Connecticut here, like depending, like they clearly had a meeting here. They're like, listen, we're the basketball capital of the world. We're the submarine capital of the world. We're the pizza capital of America. I don't think we can do the world. And then they say, but we're also a foodie capital. They're like, oh, we got to be much more humble there. We're only the foodie capital of New England. Because I guess they didn't want to pick a fight with other regions. But even then, like, I figure the folks in Massachusetts, Maine, et cetera, are like, whoa, Connecticut, where are you coming with this stuff?
So I've been doing a deep dive on Twitter, aka X, and no comment, by the way, from New York Governor Kathy Hochul, New York City Mayor Eric Adams. I mean, guys, this is like a layup for you. Have fun, enjoy. You'll seldom get easier press than this. So good on New Jersey's governor for just picking this food fight.
There you go. A literal food fight, Jill.
Speaking of which, Mosh, cheers to the freaking weekend. It's Friday. Time for what we are watching, reading, and eating. What are you watching?
So I keep seeing the promos. My social media feed is all about The Perfect Couple, the new Nicole Kidman show on Netflix. I like this. At the end of the review from Variety magazine, they describe Perfect Couple as such. Despite the nonsensical narrative and its lack of actual depth, the series has enough magnetic star power and conspicuous intrigue to make it a delightful and highly watchable experience.
I'm in.
Nonsensical narrative, lack of depth, but a highly delightful, watchable experience.
Somebody did a review of Emily in Paris, which I seem to bring up every podcast these days.
Yes,
and they were basically like, no. And they were basically like, this show, it doesn't challenge us enough. And I'm like, we need to be challenged. I mean, life is hard enough. Can't we just sit back and relax?
I need you to really work me intellectually. Jill, what are you watching? Speaking of intellectual challenges this weekend.
The U.S. Open, Mosh, the women's final is on Saturday. The men's final is on Sunday, and we are guaranteed one American in the men's final, and that is because Tiafoe and Fritz are playing each other in the semis tonight.
Yeah, big U.S. Open happens in America, and it's like a near record number of Americans competing for the final here. Very cool.
Okay, Mosh, what are you reading?
A good friend of the pod, friend of mo.news, another person who started an Instagram account during COVID that has built a very large following, Sharon McMahon of Sharon Says So. Her new book is out in the next week, The Small and the Mighty, it's called. We have a special pod out with her today on the premium feed. If you're not a premium member already, what are you doing? We have mo.news/free trial. You can try it out for 2 weeks. You get first access to pods. You get a weekly news quiz. You get weekend news coverage. You get answers to questions. You get some fun on the side there. Well, anyway, you also get the pod with Sharon McMahon. The book, Small and Mighty, love it because as we talk about the presidents, actually speaks to our economic theme today. She profiles 12 Americans who made a huge impact on American history. None of them were president. None of them were elected officials. Ultimately here, people who made a huge impact, in many cases unintentionally, just living their lives, trying to do what was right. And so Small and Mighty by McMahon, that's what I'm finishing here. Jill, what are you reading?
So once again, Mosh, I am not going to be talking about a book. I am going to be mentioning a podcast.
Yes. It's okay. Let's just change it to what we're listening to at this point, Jill.
Clearly, I'm just not up for reading. I'm not into it. Yeah. So I do want to give a shout out to you, Mosh, and our interview podcast feed. If you guys haven't checked it out, it's the Mo News interview. You interviewed Pucks, John Heilemann, and Peter Hamby on the tumultuous campaign season. Yes, there's a lot of cursing.
Yeah, Heilemann dropped so many F-bombs. I was like, dude, I can't bleep all these out. So fair warning if you listen to it with kids.
But I did think that even though it's a couple of weeks old, I think that the insight, the analysis, most of it still completely holds. And it was just great. And I learned a lot. And I was really fascinated by the backstory on how quickly it seems like Biden's cognitive health deteriorated to the point where in the past few months, before he had dropped out of the campaign, he was actually using teleprompters, even at small fundraising events where he literally just had to get up and say, hey, thanks for the check. So it just an indication of how bad things had really gotten. Also, I thought the analysis on the polling was fascinating and whether the polling techniques have been corrected to take account for Trump supporters who are sometimes skeptical of talking to pollsters. And interesting that both John and Peter don't necessarily think so. They're like, no, the polling is still wrong.
Like, do you trust the polling this cycle? I go, I'll tell you the day after the election. That's the headline.
But it is interesting because it proves that when you hear these numbers, you just have to take it all with a grain of salt. Because as you guys talked about, a lot of Trump supporters are just more skeptical of talking to pollsters in general. So are they being undercounted in a lot of these polls? Again, exactly.
Again, I always use polling averages instead of individual polls. And I also use it for direction. Like when you see a direction, like basically every poll, and there's like 100 of them from August, went in Harris's direction. So clearly there was movement. July was the opposite, right? A movement towards Trump. But in terms of specificity, like, well, the poll said that he was going to win this state. Well, it's plus or minus. Well, it's a 2-point advantage in the polls. It's a plus or minus margin of error of 5. Who knows? Jill, much more fun topic. What are you eating this weekend?
Mosh, I am going to try to savor the last licks of summer. And in doing so, I think I'm going to check out Clam Bar in Bayville. It's on the water. They've got good fried shrimp, lobster, etc. So I think, like I said, just soaking in the last couple of weeks. Yeah.
Seafood weekend.
And what about you, Mosh? Talk to us about the frozen fruit.
Okay. I'm not going to pretend that I'm new to frozen fruit. Like, we all know about it. But my mother-in-law had in her freezer True Fru. I don't know if you've tried these. They have a whole variety of chocolate-covered fruits. They have chocolate-covered frozen coconut, frozen banana, chocolate-covered strawberries, raspberries, blueberries. And I know my wife, Alex, will often make them, on her own. But True Fru, I'm totally into it, and I've been digging them this week. And to my mother-in-law, Mel, I owe you a couple bags right now. I'll head to the grocery store because I just finished them.
Are you cleaning out your mother-in-law's fridge? Is that what you're trying to tell us?
Well, we've been here temporarily. Thank you, Mel, for letting us stay as we moved out, but our place wasn't ready. And I haven't cleaned out. There was a bag. I finished the coconut one, so I'm going to replace those, okay?
No, I'm sure, by the way, that it is her absolute pleasure because with you also comes your sweet daughter, her granddaughter.
Yeah. Rank, granddaughter, her daughter, and then Mosh eating the frozen fruit out of the freezer. By the way, True Fru is TRUFRU. I'm going to have to go check out the local grocer to figure out where she bought them so I can replace them.
So Gen Z. All right. Thank you guys for listening to the Mo News podcast and bearing with us on this short week where we somehow
We gave you 2 Wednesday podcasts officially.
If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Check out the Interview Pod, the Carlos Whitaker that was up on Premium, now up on Interview Pod. And as I mentioned, the Sharon McMahon. Talking history, interesting narratives, just nerding out on general government and history over on the Premium Pod.
And for F-bombs, check out the one that I mentioned.
There aren't that many, maybe a dozen over an hour, but, more than usual here on the podcast where we try to keep it PG-13.
Okay, everyone, have a wonderful weekend.